So it's a hello and welcome to Wingspan Full Court Africa. And can you believe it? It's episode 2. We got the length and breadth of the African basketball covered on the continent, the nation. And I'm alongside one of Africa's finest when it comes to scouting, when it comes to coaching, when it comes to wearing many hats. I'm joined by Jacques van der Stier. And Jacques, they say when it's nice, we do it twice. So maybe thrice until it suffices. But we're back and it should be a good one.
Yeah, and I'm excited, man. And by the way, I'm always feeling that you have a pretty bad joke coming when you're being so nice with me. So I'm excited to be here. Hey, man, it was a crazy weekend with all those games, the World Cup qualifiers. We have a lot to talk about. So that, I'm ready. I'm ready for you.
Well, I think we've got a lot to break down, and we love African basketball, so let's just get right into it. And I mean, it was a big weekend because the FIBA World Cup qualifiers that finally tipped off and took place out in Tunisia, Group A and Group C in action. That's 8 teams, 8 different head coaches, 8 different countries, all vying for the 5 spots that are available. One thing about the World Cup qualifiers and the structure and format of tournaments on the continent and FIBA Africa and FIBA in general is that the winning AfroBasket or winning Eurobasket or winning competitions doesn't count anymore. You've got to go and qualify again and to find your spot in the World Cup. So they wipe the slate clean. Every team's got to start all over again, and they've got to find a way to qualify. They did this so that more teams can play at home in front of their home fans, and I think it's actually fantastic. You've got the African champions who were just crowned earlier this year, and now the teams have got to re-up. But finding spots in the calendar is probably a little bit difficult, and that's going to lead us into our first part of the conversation, Jacques. It's how do these teams get prepared now? With the full basketball calendar, trying to align that globally. I think it's one of the biggest challenges for African teams and even European teams.
Yeah, most definitely. And I just wanted to revert back about what you just said in terms of that the African champion doesn't get an automatic bid for the World Cup. I mean, there are some pros and cons. I was always in favor of, whoever wins the AfroBasket should actually have an automatic bid. But, it kind of helps creating a new competition by itself, looking to qualify for the World Cup. It makes it very, very interesting. But as you mentioned, the biggest thing when you watch those games is how hard to evaluate those teams at this level, as it is hard for them to prepare. It's a small window. When you look at it, most of the African players, a lot of the top African players are playing somewhere else on the planet. They only have so many days to get ready, get back into their national teams. Some teams like DRC Congo actually is in Auxerre in France. Again, they decided to prepare. They don't even prepare locally at home in Kinshasa or somewhere else. They're going to France. So yeah, sometimes I think it's a little struggle when it comes to flights, when it comes to recruiting at this moment of the season. You definitely cannot go get your NBA guys, and it's hard to get your top guys because they at this very moment they about to get involved in the biggest competition, in their biggest competition. But you watch the game and you just know that the second window is always more competitive than the first one, even though this one was very interesting.
I mean, there's always going to be challenges, and this is across the board. The thing is that it is applied uniformly. So whether it's in Asia, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in the Americas, it's a World Cup qualifying window across the board, and your interest is really in where you are. And I guess it's really good in terms of that because it allows different leagues across the world to try and align calendars and make players available where they want to be available. But still, that being said, there's packed basketball calendars. You mean NCAA is on the go, NBA is on the go, worldwide leagues are on the go, and these teams pay good money for their players to come across and represent them on that club scene. So trying to let them go as well. And with the change that's happened in U.S. college basketball, there's a lot of Africans playing across that side. It becomes even harder. That new NIL makes the players even more valuable, and it makes colleges even more reluctant to let players go.
What's interesting about the NIL is since we've had the NIL, everybody wants to study 4 years. Back when I was in college, I mean, people would stay for, I went to college in the 90s. I went to play college basketball in the 90s. But we had that trend saying 1 year or 2 years, basically college basketball was a way to get into the NBA. It was nothing else. But since we got the NIL, everybody's looking, every European African player is looking to go to college. But as you mentioned, it's impossible to go get those kids at this very moment for that window. It's just too hard. So teams have to find ways to get their players, but also they do have to meet standards. We talk about insurance, the kind of, you got to train on a wood floor. There's a level of standard when you train and you play with professional players that you have to have in order to have a week of training session before you jump into those qualifiers, and it's not easy. And there are many countries in Africa where you're not going to find that wood floor. I'm talking about, an tip-top shape like you find in the United States with the AC and everything else. It's not easy to have it. So they do have to find new ways. Going to Dubai, Eastern countries, going to North Africa has been also a solution. I guess also I've heard a few times South Africa is a place to go, but it's not easy for those guys to get prepared.
No, preparation is always difficult. First of all, there's no time for chemistry to align. And that's why sometimes as a strong local league plays such a big part in how we see teams perform. If a core of your guys are playing together, especially in your strong local league, there's been examples of that throughout the history of African basketball. Then those teams have generally performed just a little bit better because you've got guys who are playing together. They're not searching for chemistry. They played under a coach. Traditionally, it would be somewhat local coach or an international coach who's been based locally. And I don't know if that narrative exists anymore because the game really is more global now. The BAL has had an impact. We've seen borders just get a lot smaller, and coaches are almost, you feel, within your region. You can just find them across the continent, and leagues are mushrooming and growing. And I think it's had a very positive impact with regards to that. But still, it makes player availability a big issue. That all being said, we were still treated to really high quality African basketball in these qualifiers. I think the federations did a good job of getting their players available, and the players, that the second part is they've got to make themselves available, which is always a tough one because the club or country debate becomes a lot tougher, especially depending on the financial situation that especially African players find themselves in.
Yeah, and I'm all in favor of playing for your national team. I think that's part of the business, but also it's your heart. That's the least respect you gotta give to your flag. Is coming to compete, with your country. But also, I do understand for players sometimes, and we're talking specifically about Africa. Let's just talk about flights. And you and I, we've been traveling a lot in Africa. When we do the BL, you're coming all the way from South Africa, right? And when you have to go to Morocco or Senegal, sometimes I'm amazed. Are you telling me, 15 hours, 20 hours? So you got to take those flights into account, man. So a player, as you are going through the season, you practice once a day. Sometimes you practice twice a day. And you're thinking about the long flights that you got to take if you either, you play in Mexico, you play in I'm not going to talk about the G League, but let's say that you play in Europe somewhere, you might have to connect with 2 or 3 flights. You might, be into those airport for, 24 hours. You land, you got to get back onto your feet, get into the rhythm. So sometimes it is a little bit challenging for players to think about, man, I have such a small window. I have to go back, get ready with my guys, and then come back here and compete. For my contract, by the way, I got to continue to compete. There's no, when I always say when it comes to basketball sport, there's no middle class. You either at the top, you're at the bottom, but you got to keep on fighting. So those guys come back, fight for their minutes, fight for whatever they have on their plate, and that trip can definitely be challenging. So I was happy with this one. We seeing local guys. I'm always in favor of seeing local guys playing because there are always a lot of surprises. Koulibaly, which our first time saw with Stade Malien at the BAL, and then play with the national teams. That's a local guy that we discovered. So there's always a lot of surprises when those teams are capable to actually scout and recruit within the country.
Okay, I think we've laid out just how difficult it is for teams to try and put this thing together, right? Maybe we start to look at what happened out there in Tunisia because it was a little bit surprising. So Group A and Group C in action for the first time in this window. Group A includes South Sudan, Cameroon, CapeVerde, and Libya. And then Group C, of course, had Guinea, Tunisia, Nigeria, and Rwanda. Now, I don't know where you want to go first or what your feel is, but I think the easier one to start with is, hey, man, what happened in Group C? Because Guinea come away undefeated in that qualifying window, which I think surprised everyone, right? Because you have 2 former African champions in that, and Rwanda, of course, don't come away with the win. I'm not sure that they would have been expected to pick up a win, but I mean, Guinea they've had one fantastic 2025.
And Guinea is, it's a basketball country. I'm not talking about just the men's, girls basketball, boys basketball. They're playing very well the last few years. 3-0. They won by double digits every games. I thought they were solid. Starting five, Evans. Let me just jump into my stats. I got a few notes. Evans, 23 points. So I rounded up a little bit, but 23 points, shooting 47% from the three-point line and 90% from the free throw line. We're talking about an elite player leading the team. And when you have stats at that level, you just have an amazing impact. But you know what? You had Boom coming, on the wing. You had Drame. Drame didn't have an amazing stat, but he's just a solid guy on both ends that you can trust. Getting the right position, making the right pass. Things I love about him: the short roll. He makes quick decisions, find his wings very quickly. And not just thought that they had a solid qualifiers. They were probably, and they're 3-0, but sometimes you get to a 3-0 record without being the best team. By playing the best, but without being the best team. I thought they had the best team, but also they had the best roster during those qualifiers, and well-deserved 3-0. There's not a lot to say about them, but they just came in ready.
Well, I mean, it's going to preempt a little bit of something I want to talk about later, but the surprise package that they were, and the way that they've been able to pick up those wins, that in 2025, they've beaten the African champions Angola. They picked up their first ever win against Nigeria. They picked up a win against Tunisia. They have been able to upset the apple cart, and they also picked up a win against Africa's number one ranked team right now, the Bright Stars of South Sudan, right? So they their ability to stay consistent, I think, is something that they're going to have to look at going forward. But I think there's a real plan happening in Guinea. We're seeing a revolution. The win that they picked up in Angola was against Angola in the AfroBasket. I was sitting there courtside when that happened. And when you look, and you talked about Shannon Evans, he came in to fill a spot for Alpha Diallo, right? And that spot filling makes a big difference, I think, with the way that you come in for 23 points that Alpha Diallo was doing, shooting pretty much the same percentage, and then you pick it up and you do exactly the same thing. They've got a solid recipe. Boom Jr., I think, is one of the rising stars of basketball on the continent. We're going to hear a little bit more from him. He's got a fantastic game. I like the way he paces and tempos the game. He shows a great amount of floor leadership. Is a fantastic shooter as well. And they have a nice foundation that they can build on. I think the surprising thing, and I want to talk about it, is that Tunisia, even though they say they're in a rebuilding phase, they still managed to pick up 2 wins. But really, their backcourt, Abada and Manawi, Omar Abada and Osama Manawi, they were really great. They had a fantastic tournament, to chip in with the veteran Firas Layani. I think they're missing some big pieces, and I say big pieces, which is a piece in the front court. They've always had Salah Mejri or Sliman Radwan. They've had a solid front court piece that they've always built around, but they don't have that so much anymore. And they certainly are in a new phase of Tunisian basketball.
No, you said it right, Q. I think 2-1 is exactly where they wanted to end up. And just because when you look at the group, you just know that normally, and I'm just saying, when you look at the team and where you are in terms of basketball, you should be able to beat Rwanda. You look at Nigeria, you never know what you get from Nigeria. And, Nigeria is an amazing country when it comes to basketball, but we just know that the situation down there is a little difficult. So that's the kind of win that you want to be able to also to pick up. But Tunisia, even though in rebuilding phase, you always know they're going to have that chemistry. They're going to have that continuity with coaching. They're going to have that experience. When we hear the names Manawi's been the BL for what I think probably 4 out of 5 years or something like that. Those guys actually have everything that they need to carry this national team, but they were a little. I'm going to say short and light in the paint. And we saw it against Nigeria, because when you play against a team like Nigeria, everything's going to be a rebound, just because you just don't know what kind of team they're going to have and the kind of chemistry. So even shooters follow up on their rebounds. And you could see how many offensive rebounds they got. But Tunisia, came in with the right wins at the right time. They shot the ball. Marnawi, I think, came in with 25 points on his first win against Nigeria. 25 points. It was the threat that we know behind the three-point line. And then they get the second win. So definitely for them, and I think coming out of 2-1, even though in a rebuilding phase, is where they expect it to be when you look at the whole group.
Now, I mean, Nigeria have always fascinated me because at any given time, they are they kind of are like South Sudan because at any given time they could pull an NBA caliber roster, and we've seen that. We've seen when they do that, when they're able to go deep into their player resources, they could boast one of the most talented rosters on the continent. But so again, the continuity, player availability, player wanting to play. The Nigeria Federation has started to get their act together now. They have been in the news for on the wrong side of the news because of disorganization, but with them being the Tigers, their women's team has been fantastic on the African stage. They 5-time champions now. Not without controversy, but the men at this stage they're a step behind where their women's basketball is, and one feels that if they had got their roster together and the strength right, then they could have been having the same conversations that the D Tigers are having continentally. But that 1-2 record and a little bit of inconsistency, probably not their best showing at this World Cup qualifying window.
No, Q, and you said it all. Listen, you just never know what you're going to get from the Nigerian national team. One of the most athletic, physical, talented team that there is in Africa and in the whole world, just to be honest. If they bring the whole roster, it's a tough team to beat, but you just never know who they're going to get. But also, as you just mentioned, you don't know what's their situation in terms of preparation, how much time they spend together. It's a little crazy. So the game that they actually played, the type of game was a little rough on the edge, not much offense. It was more of a basic type of games where everybody would try try to score, try to attack. They had a bunch of physical guys, but just not enough offensively or defensively. Even the schemes were a little bit limited. They came out with 1 and 2, but as you just mentioned, you just never know next window who they're gonna bring. And it only takes so much for Nigeria to bring some guys that can win it all. So this was actually what I expected, because we just know the internal situation is not easy. But there's always a surprise with Nigeria. You don't know what they're gonna bring next.
Well, let's close out with Rwanda because 0-3 they are in this window. This is definitely one of the rising stars in terms of basketball on the continent. They have infrastructure. They've got a solid league now that their players are playing in consistently. They're able to build a little bit more chemistry, but they've also recruited the naturalized player in McCormick. He was arguably one of the standout centers, or if not the standout center in Group C. Where to for them from here?
Yeah, and I think there's a debate around Rwanda, and they've been hosting so many events the last few years with the BAL, EWB. There's so many camps and everything else. A lot of the big time, heads in Africa has spent a lot of times in the country helping raising the standards. But they come out 0-3. The question is that what is their strategy to actually improve their national team? They nationalized McCormick. Is it 15 points, 16 rebounds, or 16 points and 15 rebounds, 6.5 offensive rebounds, solid in the paint, the kind of guy that you dream to have, because he just solved a huge problem. Basically, he's going to rebound for you. I think he's shooting at 57% from the field, exactly what you're expecting from a 6'9", 6'10" guy, big body build. But the question is you gotta develop your local game to a point where it can have an impact internationally. And when I look at Rwanda, it makes me question, for many years, North Africa was dominant on the continent, just because the infrastructure, but also the basketball experience, IQ being close to Europe, the exchange, with the European continent was helping those countries to have an edge. But when you look at what's happening now with all the top African players playing either in Europe or the United States, when they come back, there's just too much physicality. So Rwanda's going to have, first of all, to continue to discipline their team, to continue to develop their preparation, but also they got to get into a more physical type of game. Almost at every position, they're either a little bit less athletic or not as physical. When you play against Nigeria, when you play against Guinea, that's the type of athletes you're going to have. So they're going to have to find a way to get into that physical, athletic game on top of all the discipline that they already have shown.
Couldn't agree with you more. And there's nothing more to add to that. I mean, there's time. And, the great thing about this is that there's another window. They get to watch the other two groups, Group B and Group D, go in it. and then they get back into action again. But format allows some continuation, so they're going to have to carry that 0-3 record, but it's also not the end because from here we go into a 12-team group, which means that just the fourth team in each group will fall off. But those results will carry through into the next phase as well. So winning does matter, results do matter. And that being said, when you look at Group A, we have 3 teams that are 2-1, and that is, take your pick because they are quality teams. When you look at how it currently stands, South Sudan at the top because of their plus 50-point difference. Cameroon, they're in second place, and CapeVerde with their 2-1 record, and then Libya, still trying to figure things out. They're 0-3.
Yeah, that group was pretty close. You said 2 teams with 2-1 records. South Sudan also had a deep roster, bringing some new guys. They play with, I think, 10 or 11 deep. Well, I'm talking about players almost, I think the 11th player was playing 8 minutes a game and the 12th, 4 minutes a game. So they went deep into their roster. Everybody got on the court. A few new names had some playing time. As we mentioned with Nigeria, South Sudan can bring some amazing players at any times. And what has been actually on the other end is the leadership that South Sudan has with, Luol Deng, making sure that he connects with all the talent that they have globally in Australia, in Europe, in the United States. And they've been very patient, and I think they have done an amazing job strategizing around the game of basketball, bring the right guys at the right moment, but also evolving the next layer of players. And that's exactly what we saw during this tournament, this qualifiers.
When you think about them, I think about the Olympic roster that they put out with them. It was 50 players. There were 55 players or 60 players on that roster, and all of them boasting a solid resume and, having to whittle that down and try to find 12 names that would play then. And you see how the changes just come in. I mean, Maker Makura, he had an amazing window. He was on the radar of all the players in Group A. I mean, the players and coaches in Group A. And you just keep wondering how deep can the basketball resource go for Luol Deng, because he keeps showing us that there's just so much talent in South Sudan. And the one thing they do have in abundance is length and athleticism. And the guys get off the court in a hurry. And what they've also done particularly well, and that's how they got to where they were, is they shot the 3-ball well. So they miss, they go and get back the rebound. It's either a finish or they punish you on the outside.
And listen, man, no South Sudanese should play soccer. That's the only country. No South Sudanese should ever play soccer. You guys need to keep on playing basketball. They just do a great job. But as you just mentioned, it all starts with size and height and agility on the court. And I'm going to say something, when I watch them play, nobody looks small on the court. And I'm saying, even if you see a 6'1", 6'2" South Sudanese, they don't look small. Long arms, long legs, very agile, amazing wingspan. So everybody on the court's got that specific body build. And when you see how much it helps on every closeout, because now you get, 6'4", actually with a 7 feet wingspan closing out on you, that's a big guy coming at you. And defensively, it's hard to go around. So many arms are up, they're agile, quick feet, they move, they rotate. Everybody was in shape. It was a battle for anybody to score basket on them, and they did a great job. And then once they start, playing the defense that at the level that they can play, rotating, grabbing those rebounds, they're very quick and fast break. Gash was amazing, finishing the break. The top 3 players, Gash, Adele, and Maker, all 3 of those guys were shooting the ball well behind the 3-point line. And that's always a huge plus when your 2 or 3 top guys not only can get into the paint, but are honest 3-point shooter. That's exactly the kind of players they were. It was a good team. They can do better because we just know that those guys were 1 point away from the biggest game ever to be played by an African team. And I know you want to talk about it, but it's just, like you said, it's like I've been to my son is 7 years old, so I go to an anniversary and there's a clown and, they start putting their hand and then there's a rabbit and all that. But South Sudanese, there's no end to that bag. They can go as deep as they want and pull out anything that they want to. So this country has been amazing and actually has been a very positive effect on the rest of the continent.
Yeah, the bright stars, that's what they called, and they continue to shine. And, it was a little bit interesting. It was really surprising when you look at what happened against Cameroon, because they were held to just 56 points. And Coach Alfred Aboya, who's taken charge, and he led Cameroon to 4th place in the AfroBasket. Alongside, he was able to secure the services of Jeremiah Hill. He's been superb. He just provides enough leadership, enough scoring at crucial moments. He takes the big shots when they need it. He shows a cool, calm head under pressure. They look to him for leadership, which he gives a lot of. And then the fact that they were able to get an EBC for AfroBasket, I mean, an NBA roster player making himself available for country continues to be, a great example, because we see it in Europe a lot where NBA rostered players make themselves available for country. I think it's got to be a best practice across the African continent, as long as our competitions continue to improve, take care of players, ensure that the conditions are right for everybody that's going to be out there. Because we have fantastic players globally, and we love to see them compete on the continent. We don't need to watch on our screens. You can actually go to the stadium and just take in what these guys do. But that being said, Cameroon, that was one of the shocks in Group A when they picked up that win.
Yeah, and you started to talk about the coaching staff continuity, so important. Aboya coming back. I know no Cameroonese wants to talk about what happened at the AfroBasket. I tried to have that conversation a couple of times, and it got loud very quickly, to be honest. But they're always coming. They brought Yves Missy for AfroBasket, which is something that I just love to see, a young man, getting his experience in the NBA, but also coming, to support the national team. The 2-1 at this qualifiers, there was something that I just noticed with Cameroon is I think that Hill didn't play at the level. I mean, he's solid, he's an elite player, but I felt like he wasn't and didn't have the shooting percentage that he normally gets, and that may be a question of rhythm. It can certainly happen when you have basically 3 games and in a few nights. Your shot needs to be on target right away. They had a hard time finding a second scorer, but the physicality that they have, the roughness, the winningness always comes with the flag. The Cameroonian are some of the toughest people on this planet, and they coming for your heads, and that's exactly what they showed. They finished with 2-1. They got surprised against CapeVerde during the first game, and then get back on track. They could have been 3-0. To be honest, it was this close of being 3-0, but CapeVerde made it happen on the first night. But still, they survived the 2-1. I think that they saved what they wanted to save. Then they're gonna have all their chances.
Yeah, since you're talking about CapeVerde and you're bringing them in, I mean, this team is difficult not to like, right? They just continue to show fighting character whenever they're on the floor, and whenever you think that you can count them down or out, in comes the heart and soul of their team is Ivan Almeida, El Condor, as is known. He's just the engine. He does not know when to stop. He continues to play physical basketball. Whatever you throw at him, and it doesn't matter. You can't ruffle his feathers, because he's gonna play his game the way he knows how to play it, and his teammates are gonna be around him. They've played around him for so many years, and it's a recipe that's worked. And he continues to just drive their performance on the floor. But you find guys stepping up at the right moments. You know that they are probably the true definition of what a team looks like, because as much as you plan for Almeida, Michael Mendes might have a good night. Joel Almeida might have a great night. Correa could come from somewhere, and then whoever else they choose to bring, because they also have some depth of resources, despite being a 500,000 population country. They just do. They were amazing, and I think they'd be very happy to come away with that 2-1 record and still have a chance at qualifying for the World Cup.
Oh yeah, the biggest surprise in this whole qualifiers between Group A and Group B, that's what I think, that's my perception, was CapeVerde going 2-1. They won their first games against Cameroon. And by the way, Ivan Almeida needs a statue somewhere in his home country, because he's everywhere. He's playing at the BAL, he's playing with the national team, always play with a big heart, and he's playing multiple games, actually every game, because he's playing against the other team. He's playing against the referees, and he always finds ways to get his game going. And it's a wild game because, they come with a level of mistakes. It comes with a level of intensity. And sometimes you can see that, within the team, it creates a level of tension. But he's playing to win, and he's fighting for every second. Let me just, I was going through the stats. Average 16 points. Okay, that's him. 17 efficiency. So he's the best scorer, best efficiency, best rebounder on his team, best shot blocker on his team, second in assist, and second in steals. So basically, one more time, it's just a huge motor that he has. He keeps on running everywhere. What scared me getting into this qualifier is that to me, they need more than just him. They need a lot more, and he needs to accept to play without the ball. His usage with the ball is one of the highest I've ever seen in basketball. And he needs to let it go and let people make decisions. But, once they got that wins against Cameroon, they were on, they came back, because I thought Cameroon, when you look at the first quarter, you're like, okay, they're gonna lose by 10 to 15 points. They keep on coming back, they get that win, and then suddenly, there's a lot of confidence. And then his brother was right there playing with him, averaged 14 points during this qualifiers. And one of the craziest, I don't know if he's a point guard, he's not a primary ball handler, but Correa is a game changer with the BL and the national team, one of the most athletic guy, rebounds the ball. When he starts making his shot, is so dangerous, and he's bringing that intensity on defense. With what it looked like a limited roster, finishing 2-1 in this Group A, I think is a miracle.
I hear your point about usage, but I want to challenge you to say that if it's not broken, you don't fix it. That usage is translated into wins. And if you're arguing for or against, you might not like it. But when you look at the track record of what they've been able to accomplish with him leading at the front end, it becomes difficult to say, take the ball out of his hands. It might look better. It might be more attractive basketball. It might be more fun for his teammates, but it's not always going to translate into a win. Ivan Almeida, from when I've watched him the first time to where we are now, he only plays to win. He has no off switch, and that's why a lot of teams want to sign him, because that character is infectious. But he's as much fun to have as a teammate. He's not fun to play against at all, and you don't like to see him on the other side because he plays the game. He only knows how to play the game one way, and that's hard.
Listen, you make some very, very good points, and something that I like about him, he doesn't skip games. He has played every game with the BAL. He's playing almost every game with the national team. He never get injured. He's always there giving 100%. It's just that even though he's definitely the best player on his national team, it seems like we know how far they can go with that kind of game, that kind of offense, that kind of a structure. If there's anybody in CapeVerde that can do it better, they have to show up at some point.
Eddie
But we
Tavares
haven't
might have
seen
something
anybody
to say about that.
Yeah, but and I'm not gonna criticize the big guy. The big guy is the big guy. But what I'm saying, you got to be there. You got to be there to offer a service. You got to be available to offer a service. Almeida has done a great job being there, serving his country, fighting for everything. I know it's not easy to play for him, with him. And sometimes it looks like you're playing for him, by the way he handles the ball. But he gets it done, and he fights for everything. He came out with I think one of the craziest stats ever in basketball, being almost the top guy in every statistic possible. But you know what? 2-1 is what they wanted to have, and that's what they got.
Well, now it's time to look at Libya just quickly. They went 0-3 in this window. I felt like they improved despite limited availability of some of their roster. And because they have less player resource than some of the countries, if you lose players like Badrush and Ahmad and they're not available, it affects their chemistry intangibly, and it becomes difficult for them to compete, especially here on this big African stage. And I suppose when you look at the results, they were able to put 74 points up against CapeVerde in their final game. They held Cameroon tight throughout, 71-77. There's some light at the end of the tunnel there, but I'm sure they want to do a lot better in the second window.
Yeah, but you said it. A limited roster. I love who they got on the bench. Sam Vincent. And nothing. We know the guy. We know he can coach. He's got the experience. He gets the respect right away when he's on the bench. We saw that, you and I, when we were with the BAL. He gets the respect of a coach, and he knows what he's doing. But as you just said, just too limited. Badrouche was missing. They always want to get into that fast kind of team that keeps on running and attack one-on-one within the first 5 seconds. I thought they were lacking size, athleticism. No big guys, no true big guys in the paint. Sadi at the point as a primary ball handler, it was the first time that I saw him just handling the ball so much for 3 games in a row. He did a great job because you can see he's got basketball experience. He know how to start the offense, how to share the ball and everything else. But I just think that I like him off the ball, making decisions, finishing with the ball instead of having to make those early decisions for the team. Just a short roster. They need to bring some big guys. They need to get thicker and more athletic if they want to be able to compete with the rest of the
Well, that's going to bring us close to what we do with the World Cup. We've had a good look at all the teams right now, but there's something that has brought that we thought we could chat about a little bit because it's a factor in world basketball right now. And where when you look at how teams can improve rosters, you traditionally go through natural resource trying to look in local leagues, but a lot of talk right now has been about naturalization. I think we saw it rise to prominence. It's always been a prominent conversation on the continent because teams, whenever a player goes out of the country and or has shown interest in wanting to move to a country and is a great basketball player, it becomes an easy option to naturalize them and adopt them and then absorb them into the basketball program. But I think with Joel Embiid last year, when it came to the Olympics, that really rose to prominence because the question was, this is a guy born in Cameroon. France wanted him on the roster. The USA also, with him living there and being out there, he had a passport. And the question really was, where does he play? Ultimately, he went with the USA. But I know a lot of African fans were disgruntled because, born and bred in Cameroon, was part of BWB, saw him there, but also watched the transition to him becoming a global superstar. But we have many of those kind of conversations and naturalization of picking up players. We saw what happened. It was as simple as John Jordan for being naturalized in the DRC, an American who's played in the G League, who's fallen in love with African basketball, made the decision to now play for the Congolese national team. It does keep value, but the questions are always around which local guys are going to be missing out, especially in those positions, and the ethics and morality around that. And it's a tough question, but when it comes to countries that need results, where pressure drives results, sometimes it's the only option, I think.
Yeah, and it's a huge question, by the way. And I enjoy watching John Jordan playing for the RC, Embiid playing. I mean, I would have loved for him to play for Cameroon, but at the end of the day, I'm a fan of the game of basketball, so I enjoy watching him play for the United States. It's very interesting how we talk about sports being the best players get on the court, but sometimes we tend to forget the business behind and how important is recruiting. In my world, I would think that a player should have a history with a country in order to be naturalized and play for that country. And I even push it a little deeper. And I know a lot of people don't agree with me when I say even the coaching staff, because as you just mentioned, is that it's about showing what you have done locally with your national people and where you are compared to another team. Winning is definitely the end of the road. You want to win those games, but you want to be able to compete with what you have. We've seen coaches bouncing around from one country to another. That doesn't help you develop your coaches. And then you've seen players coming and naturalizing in a different country without having any experience, any kind of just history with that country. I think at some point there needs to be a line drawn, in the sand, just to say this is what it takes, to take on somebody else's nationality if you want to move forward. And even coaches, hey, you want to represent that flag? I was born and raised in this country. I've been working, let's say, in Congo for 20 years and youth grassroots basketball. I've done everything. Maybe I also want to represent my flag. Maybe I deserve to represent my flag. And I think that you got to take into account your local guys a little bit more. But it's been like this for a long time. I think that the Joel Embiid situation kind of, because Joel Embiid always do things in a way that is very spectacular, the way he plays. So the way he moved from, looking like he was going to play for France and then jump into the United States bandwagon, and he has his own reason that we don't know, by the way. So that's something that we have to take into account. But I think that it kind of put a light on this whole situation, choosing which country you want to represent. I think it should be a little bit different.
I mean, it's really tough because there's the value that you can get from, and I'm talking about your stance on coaches especially, because sometimes the expertise that you need, has got to come from outside the country because the natural resource that you have is not good enough, and upskilling local coaches has always got to be a thought process. But how long they stay around for, what value they can give, how much of that IP, that intellectual product, some of their coaching identity will you ultimately absorb? Because you've seen it's not unique to basketball. You see that model in football, where international coaches come in, but they try to train up local coaches, and that knowledge stays with them forever and ever. And where you see really great coaches come into a country and stay for a long time, it impacts both the players, it impacts the coaches, it impacts the federation, because you've got a stalwart that you can now back. And these coaches come with not only developmental expertise, they come with knowledge of how to build the game at every single level. They know how to play. I mean, they know how to manage the X's and O's, and ultimately, they are as much a part of the country's product as they are a part of the basketball product. So, I benefited from playing under Sam Vincent and Zuba Zupcevic from Serbia, for example. If they hadn't come in, our games would not raise up, and we wouldn't have had the opportunity to play the same way or be seen by international coaches in the same way. It also brings extra credibility, so local players might just get a look in, and it becomes a little bit tougher to, not validate why these guys should be on the bench. But you do get so there's always two sides to a story, and sometimes the international coaches they are too revered, and they'll be able to take advantage of that situation, and local coaches get thrown by the wayside, and it's the federation's job, I mean, ultimately to balance what that looks like. But I'm for the coaching stuff because some countries are just way ahead, and they've got way more resource than other countries, and that's just speaking in generality.
No, and like I said, there are certain situations where I completely agree with you. I think that it's just about the standard. It's if every player on the court needs to have that nationality. I don't know why people, because there's one team. When you win an NBA championship, every coach gets the NBA ring. When you win a medal, it's the same thing. So I think that if every player on the court is a national player, same thing should be with the coaching staff, and there should be some circumstances when a coach has been affiliated long enough when he can actually do that, and some coaches might have to go through a different route. But also federations needs to come with long-term project with coaches. I think that also that's something that, you pumping a lot of money into finding players, naturalizing Americans or European players. It's a lot of money. You and I know you invest a lot of money. Why don't you pump that money into youth development and help? And you got to be patient at some points also. And like you said, I don't disagree with what you just said, but you look at yourself in the mirror. If you're not there yet, that means there's something you still can do. In between, there's probably where we should be. But I just think that, like I said, with Joel Embiid, made us think about that at a very moment, he could have played for the Philippines, he could have played for France, he could have played for anybody on this planet. Basically, even though he had no history with that country, he ended up with the United States, which kind of makes sense, by the way. He's been living in the United States for a long time. He's playing the NBA. But it was kind of an extraordinary story to follow him along the roads, writing a letter I think he wrote a letter at some point to the president of France or something of that nature.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, and the thing is, and you're not wrong, because now I think about the Bahamas and Eric Gordon, and that naturalization. I think there was even talk of Klay Thompson. I can't remember, but that's to be confirmed. I'm not gonna throw that there. But again, because if you're not gonna get the opportunity to play for your national team, and that's another thing that factors into all of this, the opportunity to represent country with pride, then where you were born or where your parents might have lineage or heritage from might be a real option for you. And that's usually the first option that federations go to when it comes to naturalization, is if one of the parents has got a passport or is born there, it makes it a little bit easier. And if you feel aligned to mother or father or even grandfather heritage, then I'm not against it. And if you're capable of being one of the top 12 players or one of the top 15 players in the country, then go ahead and compete for your spot. There's nothing wrong with that.
No, I agree with you.
Well, guess what? We've come to the end of this one, episode 2 of Wingspan Full Court Africa. And if you like the way we're speaking about the game, then like and subscribe, wherever that's going to be up here on the screen. And we look forward to bringing you more insights, more analysis, more little JQ front court action as we continue to grow and as we continue to conversate about this wonderful game on the continent.